place is cursed. Cursed. It's got a death curse.
Who are you? What do you want?
God sent me. Get out of here, man. I got to warn you. You're doomed to stay.
I'm Zack Bennett. I was born in 1981, but somehow I missed out on seeing the greatest movies of the 1980s. So I'm fixing that. I'm going to watch these great films and talk about them with my friends who have loved them for decades. This is Video Oblivious. Episode 11, 1980s, Friday the 13th. What?
You're already doing it wrong.
Am I doing it wrong?
You are doing it wrong, but we don't have to talk about that now. We can.
We will. Ryan Smith is my guest this week on Video Oblivious, and we're talking about Friday the 13th. I'm doing it wrong?
You are doing it wrong.
Okay, how's it go? Okay, there you go.
Or something closer to that.
Closer to that than what I was doing.
That's what everybody does.
Well, I've only seen it once. You've seen it a few more times. Ryan, you and I have known each other, 1989?
Whatever third grade was.
Third grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Ryan and I grew up together, basically. I started going to Ryan's school in third grade. We went all the way through high school together, and we have stayed friends throughout the years, and here we are doing a podcast today, Ryan.
Who knew?
Who knew we would be doing this? I know that you have been trying to get me to watch this movie since probably third grade, and I haven't until this week.
I finally convinced you.
In 2024.
Right.
Friday the 13th.
I remember talking to you, in fact, and saying, you know what? In 2024, that'll be the year that you watch. I'm just kidding. That didn't happen.
It might have. I don't know. I was hoping to time this out to a month that had Friday the 13th in it and just release it on Friday the 13th. But I think that's not until September this year or something. It's way late in the year. And I thought, I'm not waiting that long. I need to go ahead and do this now. So Friday the 13th it is, although it's whatever day this releases. So, the original Friday the 13th, there are 12 of them now?
Something like that,
So we're talking about the very first one that came out in 1980. Ryan, I know this stuff, but let's just let our audience know a little bit of backstory about you and I and our relationship. So we became friends in third grade. We've always had a lot of the same interests, except for horror movies. You love them. I'm not a huge fan.
Yeah.
But aside from that, we have known each other and been through it all together in our relationship. And when I first met you, you were an only child.
Yeah, it's true.
And then you got an adopted sibling right after
Probably
that.
in that same year, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So you grew up with an adopted sister from Korea, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
South Korea.
Yeah. What's that?
South Korea, as if she would come from North Korea.
So anyway, so growing up with you, your little sister was around, and she was always so much fun to be around. And I think she had a lot of the same tastes as you in these kind of movies, right?
Yeah, I think so. I probably was a bad influence in that way because she certainly is now. Whether she was when we grew up, I eventually she caved and became a fan too, I think.
Well, I never got into it. You had some other friends that you watched all these movies with them. You made horror movies in high school and beyond that. And I just was never I don't know. I don't really consider this a horror movie as much as it is a slasher movie. It's a very defined part of the horror genre.
Right.
I'm still not a huge fan of movies that are going to scare me.
Okay.
Even to this day, I will have a nightmare about it and it will freak me out.
Yeah.
Slasher movies, they don't bother me at all.
Okay.
So this one, why I held out this long to watch it, or any of them, I don't know. But we're finally there. It was released May 9th, 1980. So that was before either of us were born.
Correct.
You and I are roughly the same age. You're a few months older than me. We're both born in 81. It was an indie movie. I did not realize it was an indie film.
Yeah, I didn't either till recently. My youngest son, this has been a joy. My youngest son recently came to me and said, you know what? I want to try horror movies. And of course, my proud dad face lit up. Anyway, I bring that up to say, For the first few movies that we watched, including Friday the 13th, we watched the Netflix Movies That Made Us episode corresponding with that film right afterwards. Okay. Anyway, and that's how I found out that it was an independent film as well, because Paramount is plastered all over the...
Right.
And so I just assumed it was a big budget horror film.
And you're watching it, and I've done so many 80s movies on this podcast, and most of them have come from 84, 85, 86, 87. This one being a 1980 movie, it really still has that 70s feel, obviously.
Yes.
And it looks like movies you would have seen in the 70s, the way a lot of it were shot. Like, I'm thinking like big movies from the late 70s, like Smokey and the Bandit and stuff like that. The way scenes were shot on the road and things like that. It has a much different feel. And then when I found out that it was an indie film that was built or that was made on a $550,000 budget, even in 1980, that was nothing.
Right.
And they were able to put this movie together, and it became one of the most profitable movies in the history of film.
Yeah,
not just the movie itself, but all the sequels that it spawned, all the toys and video games and everything else, the licensing that came with it. There's the timing, of course. It was right there after Star Wars a couple of years later. So merchandising was becoming a thing in film. And I would say with this movie, it wasn't so much the first one, but once we got into the sequels is when things really started to blow up as far as that goes. And there's like 7 mainline sequels, right? 7 or 8. And they were all like a year apart.
Yeah, they came out really quick, right on the heels of each other, which is, of course, why so many of them are not as great as the first one.
Yeah.
But, they were just cranking them out. And I remember as a kid when Part 8 came out, I was like, wait, Part 8? Are you kidding me? Jason Takes Manhattan. Well, of course, he's killed everybody else at Crystal Lake, so he's got to go somewhere.
I was pleased to see it was a 95-minute movie when I was like, okay, that's digestible. It doesn't seem like there's a lot you could do with a slasher movie longer than that, right? But we talked about Paramount. It was distributed by Paramount. There was actually a bidding war between the studios. Once it was made, they started shopping it to the studios, and they went, "Oh, you've got something here.
Yeah,
this is something big." So it was the first independent slasher film to secure distribution by a mainline studio in the U.S. And then so Paramount got the rights here, Warner Brothers overseas, and from that $550,000 budget, tack on an extra $1 million for advertising, $59.8 million take worldwide. That's a pretty good return on investment.
Right. That was definitely a gamble that paid off. And is still paying off, really.
Yeah, because people are still into this movie. And
we're still talking about it.
We're here.
It's 2024, and we're talking about it.
We're talking on a podcast about it 44 years late. God, 44.
Right, so they're about to hit a big milestone.
Holy crap.
We're not 44 yet.
We'll be there soon. It's the 18th highest grossing film of 1980, even with that big take. But it was mixed in with a lot of other horror films that came out that year. The Shining was out that year, Dressed to Kill, The Fog, and Prom Night. And then something that maybe held back Friday the 13th in theaters was, and I'm not saying held it back, it did really, really well, but it also directly competed with The Empire Strikes Back.
Right, which... I mean, did it really? But
well, Friday the 13th, I just mean in theaters.
Right.
Friday the 13th came out exactly 1.5 weeks before The Empire Strikes Back was released. So once Empire came out, that was it for the box office for 1980 for the rest of the year.
Right.
But they didn't really keep great records back then, so I don't know much more about its finances, about how it did week to week versus Empire Strikes Back. But I mean, it did really well. It $59.8 million take, $20 million of that was overseas. So it still made $40 million in the United States in 1980.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Which is really, really good. So, but 1980 was a big, big year for movies. It was shot in New Jersey, which is where it was set. And the camp is still in use today.
Which is also crazy.
It's a Boy Scout camp.
Yeah.
How do you say it? Camp Nobi Bosco?
Probably just how you said it. I don't know.
NO-BE-BO-SCO.
Nobibosco.
Nobibosco.
Nabisco.
the Oreo Ritz cracker camp. But yeah, it's still in operation, and there are people who will go there just to sightsee and the town around it as well. So Crystal Lake is not called Crystal Lake, but it is a real place. When it came out, critics were mixed on it. Most derided it as pretty basic. Some said it was exploitative and overly violent with a lack of suspense, was some of the critics that I read from that movie in 1980. What would you think about that?
Well, considering... So you may have to fact check me on this, but considering it was one of the early, like you had Halloween, which was very suspenseful because of how much it restrained how much, it wasn't bloody. There's not a drop of blood in Halloween. Well, that's not entirely true. It's not as bloody as Friday the 13th.
Yeah.
And the whole mood of Halloween is just the eeriness of Michael's quiet. We don't know who he is really. Why is he stalking the babysitters and all this stuff? So compared to a movie like Halloween, I could see Friday the 13th seeming very bloody, very violent. And of course, in 2024, there are things that make Friday the 13th
it's tame.
Yes.
By today's standards. Yeah.
And I won't go down that rabbit hole, but so I could see how that would be. And it's just a cluster of scenes, right?
Right.
When you really look at it. And so I could see how that would be the response of people when it first came out. It didn't matter because it's huge.
It was a big
now.
hit. Yeah. Siskel and Ebert, though, they spent the entire episode of their TV show when it came out talking about how bad the movie was. and I mean, they didn't do that, but this was in the early days of their show in 1980. But they just did a whole deep dive on slasher films and their criticism. And come on, guys, it said they felt like it would lead audiences to root for the killer with these slasher films.
Not yet. Not until Freddy Krueger.
Yeah. But Leonard Maltin, a famous reviewer, he gave it a 1 star. He called it a bomb. And he later changed his review, gave it an extra half star because he said, quote, it was slightly better than Friday the 13th Part 2. So.
Well, the word bomb is hilarious to me because it wasn't a box office bomb by any means. But I
think
hilarious.
The critics were kind of hoping it would be if they watch it from a filmmaking perspective. Because I will say this about it. It was a little clunky.
Yeah.
And I at first was, and I noticed it especially in the scene where Annie and the truck driver are driving down the road talking to one another. And I was like, that just feels unnatural. And then I later found out that they were not actually acting with each other.
Right, yeah.
They were talking to...
who knows?
A tennis ball or something.
Yeah.
And then they spliced those scenes together. But it just, like, the pacing just felt weird.
Yeah.
And I knew that, I know they didn't have digital editing and couldn't tweak it as well back then, but it just felt off, right? And then when I found out that, oh, well, that's why. And, oh, by the way, this was made really cheap and really quickly. And it didn't have the major studio behind it until it got into the distribution phase. Then I was like, okay, I understand a little bit.
Right.
But so Audrey had never seen it either. And we were watching it together for the first time. I wish she could be here too, but to give her insight. But we got about 40 minutes into the movie. And I paused it to go get a beer. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go out. I'm going to
need some help if I'm going to finish this movie out.
And when I paused it, she said, nothing's happening. I said, what do you mean? She said, and we kind of talked about it for a minute and said, we're just watching camp counselors set up a camp. Nothing's happening.
Yeah.
We know that there's this one guy named Crazy Ralph who's running around telling everybody that they're doomed, but outside of that, nothing has happened. We've seen the POV shot from our killer, which that is pretty obvious if you're, I don't know if you're not attuned to filmmaking and storytelling that you would pick up on that, but I did, where you see it's almost like a handy cam shot. It bounces a little bit, right? When you see from the killer's perspective,
right? Yeah.
And then when it shows something else, it's a steady cam shot, right?
Yeah, it's filmmaking.
Yeah.
All the other shots are filmmakers shooting it, but then the killer's point of view is a very different, yeah.
But it's subtle. Like, it's not obvious. It's just if you didn't catch it, I guess it would be, or if you didn't know, maybe it would be hard to catch.
Right. I mean, obviously the number one clue is the characters are looking right at you.
Yeah. Well, I'm talking about like from the voyeuristic shot, like way off in the woods, looking at the counselors getting the stuff out of the truck or whatever, getting things set up, and you see this shot that's way out in the woods, but it's bouncing a little bit, and you can hear that noise that I apparently got wrong at the beginning of the show. There you go. There you go. What was I doing? Yeah.
A lot of people go
So
which is probably what it eventually sounded like 6-7 movies later, but it's not what it originally was.
It had a 66% Rotten Tomatoes score, by the way, which is not bad.
Yeah,
that would be certified fresh by their
kind
standard.
of right there on the edge. It could be pushed either way.
But nothing happened. It just felt like nothing was happening. And then as soon as I got my beer and settled back down into the chair and pressed play again, we had our first murder. But it came about 45 minutes into this 90-minute film. And so I was like, okay, business has finally picked up. Let's get going here. But it felt to me, I won't say boring because I was engaged in what was happening, but it was just, I had no connection at that point to any of our characters, except for Annie, who is already dead by that point off camera.
Right.
We didn't see her die. It was just implied. But she was the only character I knew outside of Ralph. And the only reason I knew Ralph is we got such a kick out of it is when Enos, the truck driver, comes out of the cafe and he just sees Ralph there. He goes, "God damn it, Ralph, get the hell out of here." So that's become a new catchphrase in our house is just, "God damn it, Ralph.
Oh, get the hell out of here.
Get the hell out of here."
I'm going to start using that. That's good.
It's just funny to me.
I'm going to call my kids Ralph from now on.
And every time we saw Ralph pop up in the rest of the movie, we would do the same thing. "God damn it, Ralph, get the hell out of here."
Yeah, which is funny because, what is it that he always says? If you stay, you're doomed if you stay here. And I'm like, well, how long have you been there, Ralph?
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, why would he go there? Is it just to be the warning or what?
Right.
Like, get away, dude.
I don't know if Ralph was the first or just one of the earlier like harbingers of doom in horror films, but there are definitely many since then. So I don't, was he just a plot device or...
Are you talking about just in slasher films in general?
Yeah, the old guy who shows up to, warn the dumb kids that death awaits them if they stay or if they go or wherever, that becomes, it definitely becomes a plot device as horror movies went on, which is
and it's
why
made
it's such
fun
a
of in
key,
Scream.
And especially in Cabin in the Woods, which...
So what would be the first slasher film in the genre? Would it be Texas Chainsaw? Probably.
Texas Chainsaw, right up there, I think came out the same year as Black Christmas, which I've not seen, but that
1974, both of those. And then Halloween was in 78. Now, I've never seen Halloween in full. I think my dad tried to get me to watch that when I was like 5 years old and scared the hell out of me. And so I just never went back to it. So I know about Halloween. I know the story. And they wrapped up the series supposedly a year or two ago, right?
Well, yes.
Until they make another one.
Right.
But I know about it, but I hadn't seen it. And then Friday the 13th, we'll spoil it. I knew going in that Jason Voorhees was not the killer in Friday the 13th.
Drew Barrymore tells you. Well, no, the killer in Scream tells you that at the first. Anyway,
is that where I learned it?
Yeah, that's like one of the quiz questions in the Drew Barrymore scene of Scream.
That's where I learned it.
And he tricks her. She's a horror fan, but in the moment she gets tricked and she says that Jason's the killer of Friday the 13th, and he's like, "Nope, afraid not."
That's right. You're right. So I was racking my brain trying to figure out how I knew this. Audrey did not know.
Yeah.
And
okay.
she just assumed that it was Jason because now that we've had all the sequels where Jason was the primary villain.
Right.
Right. That she thought it was, and so she was thrown for a loop. And I told her, I said, I know a piece of information about this movie that I don't think you do. Mm-hmm. And so it didn't surprise me, but I could not remember where I knew it from. And you're right, it was Scream.
Yeah.
I was thinking it was from when I was I was a trivia host a couple of years ago, or right before the pandemic, and I think it might have been a trivia question when I was hosting.
Yeah.
But now that you mention it, no, it was a trivia question in the movie Scream.
Yeah.
That's where I knew it from.
Yeah. That's why. Well, anyway, I'm gonna get that. That's why. What's her boyfriend's name? That's why he bites it, because she screws that question up.
In Scream.
Yeah, in Scream.
Yeah, because he's hanging up out in the tree outside, right?
Yeah.
Something like that?
Yeah.
I haven't seen Scream in a while either. I did what you and I saw Scream together, I think when it was new or some, maybe you went to see Scream 2. I remember going to see that.
Oh, yeah. I definitely remember rallying the troops to go see Scream 2.
In the theater.
I was so excited about that.
Yeah, Scream was a fun one. I did enjoy that one. So let's get back to Friday the 13th, though. Sean S. Cunningham was our director and producer. He actually said he cited Halloween as a major influence in making this movie. It was the 6th film he directed, his 7th one he produced. He had been working with Wes Craven for a while. He would work on 4 more films in the franchise, but he wouldn't come back for another 13 years.
Right.
Until Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday.
Yeah. The creator of the original comes back to bring you the last, which, as you always learn, they're never the last.
They're never the last one. Did he really go to hell? I'm not going to watch all these sequels. I need to know.
Yes.
Did Jason go to hell?
Yes, because there's like this dagger, like when there's a last, well, you may not know. Usually when there's like the last chapter of a villain's story, there's like all this backstory that gets added. And part of it in Jason Goes to Hell is this dagger, from what I remember. And she uses this enchanted dagger or whatever and stabs Jason, which causes all the demons to come up and drag him down to hell.
Okay.
That's my memory of it anyway. I'm sure there are other people listening going, oh, he doesn't have that right at all.
Well, I don't know. I'll take your word for it. When they were casting this movie, they said because they had no budget to pay anybody, they just said they weren't looking for great actors. They were just looking for people who were likable and believable as camp counselors.
Yeah.
I thought the acting was actually really well done in this movie, especially for young actors who didn't have much acting experience, who would go on to, outside of one of them, not really do anything else.
Right, yeah. Partly because of their roles in that movie.
You think so? Were they typecast or?
Well, the woman who played Marcy, I don't have her name right here, but
Janine Taylor.
She received from what I remember, she received a whole lot of crap for playing that role because, she's in a sex scene and she's in a bikini like pretty much every time you see her and all this stuff. And so she wasn't in much beyond that, and maybe nothing. It's all kind of a blur to me now, but. So
Janine Taylor, that was her only feature film that she ever appeared in. She's got a few stage credits. She mostly stopped acting in 1985. She has one off-Broadway stage credit from 2010.
Yeah.
But aside from that, she hasn't acted in 40 years at this point. She was a magazine editor for a long time, but now appears to be retired. So that's Janine Taylor's story. The one person we know from this movie that we actually recognize, of course, is Kevin Bacon.
Right.
And and you were talking about the bikini thing. He just said in an interview a couple days ago, he's been on a tour, like an interview circuit lately for the 40th anniversary of Footloose, which came out 40 years ago this month. Mm-hmm. And somebody asked him in one of the junkets about his experience on Friday the 13th. And he said all he really remembers about it is everybody had to wear really skimpy swimsuits.
Right.
So
including the guys.
Yeah, including Kevin Bacon.
And that wasn't even the late 80s yet, but we were getting there.
But our lead character is Alice. She's, would you call her the main protagonist of the movie? Even though it's really an ensemble cast, she outlasts everybody. At least.
Right.
So she's the one probably that gets the most screen time. And an interesting thing about her that I was looking up when I was researching this, she became the real life target of a stalker.
Yeah.
Right after part 2. Mm-hmm. And her character dies in part 2. And
spoiler alert.
Yeah, well,
for all of you people who are listening who haven't seen the rest of the movies,
I might watch part 2, but I figure everybody's gonna die in these movies at some point, right?
Right.
So it's not a big deal. But she really was the target of a real life stalker, and it freaked her out. Mm-hmm. And she just left the industry as much as she could. She went on to do some voice work. She did stunt work. She actually did ADR work for a lot of major movies. And ADR is, if you don't know, is when, not you, Ryan, but just the listeners out there, ADR work is when you go in post-production and overdub audio for the actors. Sometimes you'll impersonate one of the actors' voices to say, shoot, for the television version. Right. That's what ADR is. It's post-production audio work. But she did voice acting and ADR work for Philadelphia, The Pelican Brief, Jerry Maguire, Titanic. She has a lot of credits in a lot of major films throughout the 90s. But she was reluctant to appear on screen even almost 30 years after Friday the 13th because of the stalker experience that she had. So, I mean, that's not funny at all. It's not cool. I can't imagine the actual psychological trauma she went through. Because you're in one major movie, and all of a sudden you've got a weirdo, well, two, I guess, if she was in the sequel. But she's got a weirdo chasing her and invading her privacy, and I can understand.
Right. I mean, it makes you not want to be recognizable anymore.
Yeah. And she did not act again on screen until 2009. Yeah. And she's dipped back in it later in life, but it took almost, 30 years from Friday the 13th before she was back on screen again. From what I read, the filmmaker the director, Cunningham, wanted a name actress to play Alice since it was the primary protagonist and the one who's on screen the most. And they looked into hiring Sally Field to play that role. They never approached her about it because they were like, we can't afford her.
Right.
There's no way we're going to be able to afford. She had been on television. She had been in several movies by that point, right? She was on Flying Nun and all that stuff by 1980. But she was apparently too expensive for this movie.
Right.
Wouldn't it have been fun if she had come and been in one of the sequels just as a fun little cameo?
I think we would have liked it. We would have really, really liked it. I was hoping you'd give me that window.
Boom. Softball out of the park.
Right. That was not planned at all, like legitimately.
And I didn't know where you were going.
It was the obvious joke, though. So there's really it's really not a great joke. It's too obvious.
I didn't know where you were going with it until you connected on it. I was like, oh, that was perfect.
So yeah, I actually kind of feel bad about making that joke because it was just too.
It was good.
It was too. Anyway, so her being Alice in this would have been interesting. I mean, I like who did it. Adrienne King was.
Yeah, she was great.
Great, and I think that's what that's often what Sean Cunningham wanted people who were likable and you could see being camp counselors. Throwing Sally Field in the midst of all these unknowns may have kind of broken that a little bit. Whereas now you have a bunch of people you don't really recognize.
Yeah.
And they're believable as who they're supposed to be, which is camp counselors trying to get this place back up and running after years of, bad press, basically.
And it's the same philosophy that 20 years later the filmmakers of Blair Witch Project would have. Mm-hmm. And I was just watching a documentary. I've never seen that either. I've heard that would freak me the hell out.
Well, possibly. Yeah. If you're not a horror person.
I'm not a horror movie fan. But I was watching a documentary last night about it's a series that came out on National Geographic. It's on Disney Plus or Hulu now, and it's called Rewind the 90s or something. Mm-hmm. And it's all about the introduction of the home video camera in the 90s and how in the 80s is when the technology came about, but by the 90s it got cheap enough that everybody had a camcorder, and how it changed society from everything from like the Rodney King incident in LA with the leading to the LA riots and America's Funniest Home Videos, and how it was just everybody had a camcorder. And so when they made Blair Witch Project, it was based on that same lines. Like, the whole story is these people have a camcorder and they're going out to chase the witch. But they talked about the production of the movie and how it harkened back to Friday the 13th when they specifically hired actors that were believable, that no one knew. And the entire marketing campaign was around, oh no, this really happened.
Yeah, because they all used their actual names.
Yeah.
And
the website in the early days of the internet, it looked like an actual missing persons website and not for a movie at all. And that contributed to that movie's success. And perhaps not coincidentally, much like Friday the 13th, it was made on next to nothing and made millions
Yes.
of dollars. So it's interesting the parallels between an early slasher movie and then I would say Blair Witch was maybe one of the earliest of these psychological horror movies that went on like with Signs and Paranormal Activity and things like that. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah. I mean, especially the quote unquote found footage horror subgenre, which all, and you mentioned Paranormal Activity, all is in that format of this was actually recorded and was found later. It definitely started that, at least as a popular horror. And it's funny because you don't see it in other genres. It's all in horror. This sort of, we found this footage later, and that genre is still going. There's a movie coming out maybe even today. This was not planned either. This is not a marketing thing, but today, Late Night with the Devil is kind of a 70s found footage film that just came out. I mean, that sort of thing is still being done as a result of Blair Witch Project, as a result of Friday the 13th.
Yeah, Friday the 13th is, I mean, we talked about Texas Chainsaw and Halloween, but a lot of these directors cite Friday the 13th as their prime go-to, this is when the genre really took off example, because it was such a commercial